learners of the Postgraduate Diploma in Environmental and Occupational Health. In this session, we will discuss on the topic fertilizers, which forms a part of the course Agriculture and Allied Sector MEVE 003. Now we have seen that agriculture, this forms the backbone of our economy, and from the very ancient times we have been practicing sustainable form of agriculture. Then in between we have started using all these synthetic and chemical fertilizers, and this has impacted the environmental health, the ecosystem, the fate of the pollutants in the environment, and then we are seeing how the human beings also have got affected due to this drinking contaminated water or inhaling this contaminated air and so on. Therefore, the global cereal production has increased from 0.8 billion tons to about more than 2.5 billion tons. Now, due to the increased yield, that is from the greater use of the fertilizers and the irrigation water and the pesticides, the high yielding crop varieties and the hybrids, we are seeing these. This quantum jump in the agricultural production, this has increased the global per capita food supply. So, fertilizer is one of the most widely accepted practices for increasing the crop yield and also for the income of the farmers. But what is of interest and what is to be noted is that these practices that we are using, like any type of the fertilizer, it would be good if we can go for sustainable forms of agriculture, like using biomanure or organic farming cultivation techniques, or organic the manure or the biocompost and so on. Because when we use the chemical based fertilizers, then definitely that impacts the environmental health and also the human health. So fertilizers, as we all know, these are essential agricultural inputs because they are able to replenish the soil, they meet the crop requirements, and they ameliorate the soil and act as the soil amendments. Further, the declining soil fertility due to intensive and continuous intensive cultivation, this warrants the use or judicious application of the fertilizers to the soil, so that the soil quality, that is the physico-chemical properties and also the biological properties of the soil also have to be taken into account, and this will be improved. So, in this learning module, the objectives include defining the fertilizer, and the correct use of this is important along with the best management practices of these fertilizers. And also you will understand the importance of fertilizer usage, like how much of the fertilizer amount needs to be used on a soil in an agricultural field. The same way the fertilizer consumption trends, the impacts due to the injudicious or the indiscriminate use of the fertilizer. So these are some of the learning modules which you will be listening to in this lecture. Now let us go on to the fertilizers in Indian agriculture. Agricultural productivity, this holds the key to meeting the food security demand of our country, and the fertilizers have played a major role in increasing the agriculture productivity in the country, particularly in the last few decades. And this is expected to contribute significantly towards the future growth and also the economy. How? By increased and balanced use of the fertilizers. Despite being one of the largest fertilizer producing countries in the world, the fertilizer sector in India still faces a lot of challenges. So in India, if you see, we have the production of urea, but again the phosphatic and the potassic fertilizer salts, this are falling in short of demand. The first commercially made fertilizer, that was the single superphosphate, which is also known as SSP. This was produced almost 160 years ago in England. And in India, the first SSP factory, this was set up in 1906 in Ripet and in the province of Madras, which is now called as the state of Tamil Nadu. Most of the fertilizers that we are using in the distant past, they have been mined from the mineral rich rocks, or they are extracted from the ore complexes, or by adopting certain innovative technologies. Nevertheless, the synthesis of nitrogenous fertilizers is something different. At present in our country, 33 million tons of the chemical fertilizers are used every year, out of which 26 million tons, these are produced indigenously. In India, about 50 to 55% of the fertilizers, these are used for the cultivation of rice, of wheat and of sugarcane. Now comes 10 to 15%, that is used for the cotton production. 15% again is used for the fruits and the vegetable production. 10% is used for the coarse cereals, and 10% is used for the pulses and also for the oil seeds. So this is rough statistics and how much of the percentage of the fertilizers are used for what kind of the agricultural crop or the pulses in our country. So although India is the world's third largest producer and the consumer of fertilizer, but the average consumption of fertilizer, this is only 97 kg per hectare as compared or as against the country of China, where they use 345 kg per hectares. So you can say that it is still lesser. So the less use of fertilizer in our country is on an account of the fragmented land holdings, the preponderance of the marginal and the small farmers and so on, which are some of the factors included. Now the fertilizer use efficiency, this has been on the decline mainly due to the emergence of the deficiency of soil nutrients due to adoption of intensive cultivation and the cropping system on fragile soils like rice or wheat on the sandy soils, etc. Then we have ignored the soil fertility health largely due to the imbalance of these fertilizers or these nutrient that we are providing to the soil. Therefore, the balanced nutrient use, this ensures that the plant receives all the essential nutrient elements in adequate amounts and proportion, neither less nor in the excessive amount, so that the nutritional requirement of the crops or the cropping systems on a particular soil that is maintained and you can attain the optimum or the potential crop yield and also the productivity. So that is why the balanced nutrition is important, and sustainable management of the agricultural fields is a very important thing. Fertility status of the Indian soils. Now soil, if you see, this is a gift of nature to mankind, because without soil we will not be able to grow any of the crops. We will not be able to grow rice, wheat, sorghum, jute or any of the products which we are getting from these ecosystems. The rise and the fall of the ancient civilization. So that was believed that it is led by the sustenance or by the deterioration of the soil quality and health. So we mean to say that the soil quality is directly proportional to the health of the environment and also of the human beings. Therefore, sustainable management of the soil and the soil practices, this holds the key for meeting the basic requirement of the food, fodder, feed and fiber and the fuel production for the booming population. In this era of modernization and intensive agriculture, the soil has been exploited in such a way that it often exceeds its carrying capacity, which has resulted in poor soil health, which is emblematic of declining the soil fertility and productivity across the Indian agricultural landscape. Crop geography, if we talk about this is mainly driven by the interaction of the biotic and the abiotic factors, and more importantly, the soil and the microclimate are essential factors deciding the cropping system. Nevertheless, the cropping systems and the policy framed without due care to the soil environment and the soil fertility scenario, this would lead to condition where the injudicious use of the agricultural inputs, here we are talking about the fertilizers, and that has resulted in accelerated soil erosion, incidence of the macro and the micronutrient deficiencies, and completely declining or depletion of the soil biodiversity. So there are so many things that are affected due to this injudicious application and use of the fertilizers. Therefore, assessment of the soil fertility vis-a-vis the nutrient status of the soil, this has been made by developing or standardizing using the soil test methods and using soil test rating charts. In India, the soil testing laboratories, that is the STL, this is run by the state government, the fertilizer industries and the state agricultural universities, also the Indian Council for the Agricultural Research. These institutes, they assess the nutrient status of the soil, and based on this study, they come up with the soil fertility map, and that is published frequently. So from these maps, we can assess the nutrient content of the soil in different parts of our country, and then how much of the fertilizer has to be put or applied to the soil, and accordingly we can base our research and do our studies. Now if we talk about the nitrogenous fertilizers, so this is low in about 62% of the Indian soils, and it is medium in about 37% of the tested Indian soils. In one type of an analysis that was carried out by researchers, more than 9.6 million soil samples from 363 districts. They indicated that the phosphorus content is low in about 49% and it is medium in 47% of the soils tested respectively. In the same way, potassium content is low in about 20% of the soils tested and it was medium in 42% in the various soil samples in our country. Therefore, analysis of more than 2,52,000 soil samples of the country, they have shown that there is a deficiency in zinc in about 50% of the samples. So, from this you can understand that there is a deficiency in some of the soils, in some of them they are okay in terms of the NPK, that is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and also the zinc. Once the fertility status of a soil is known, then we can restore the fertility status by maintaining through the optimum use of fertilizer and organic manures to maintain and restore the soil fertility with increased agricultural productivity. So, fertilizers and its usage. Now, if you see, for an example, in some of the houses wherever you are staying in your own communities, you will see that in some houses, they have a lushing, wonderful garden and lush green lawns they would be having, and they will have a lot of rose plants and all the roses, different colors you will find, whether they are pink or whether they are the light baby pink color or it is dark red and so on. And in the same way, even their agricultural produce like the kitchen garden, they may be having a lot of chilies of different varieties. Some may be very short and small varieties, or some may be the thick, the bigger chilies. And in the same way, they may be growing pumpkins, they may be growing certain kinds of the beans variety and so on. So, all these if you see, then the neighboring house, they may also have certain plants, they may also have kitchen space and for their horticultural space, but maybe there the roses may not be blooming so well. In the same way, the kitchen garden may not be having so many fruits and the vegetables. So, what is this difference? So, why do we find this difference? Because it is depending upon the amount of the micronutrient or the macronutrients that are present in the soil. There is a nutrition content in the soil, and again how much of manure is being applied and how much of care is being taken in these houses for maintaining their optimum growth and the completion of their different life cycles. So, therefore, fertilizer use and the right amount of the usage is forming a very important factor. So, we have seen that the fertilizer are essential inputs for boosting the output of the various crops. Plants, when we say, they require 17 essential nutrient elements for their normal growth and completion of the life cycle. On the basis of their relative concentration or the amount in the plant tissues, they are divided into the macronutrient and also the micronutrients. The essential nutrient elements, these include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium and sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, chlorides and also the nickel contents. So, these are all the essential nutrient elements which are really important for the plant growth. These are recognized, all these elements, they are recognized as universally essential nutrient elements because they meet the essential requirements for diverse groups of organisms. For example, algae, bacteria, fungi and also the green plants. Now, when we talk about soils, I gave you the example of two houses just adjoining each other, and how in one house the productivity is good and the other house maybe the soil is not so good and the production of these the flowers or of the vegetable or the fruit and the vegetables are not so up to the mark. Why? Because soil, they vary in their capacity to supply different nutrients to the different crops. Two soils having the same content or available nutrients, they may not supply the same amount of these nutrients even to the same crop. In the same way, similarly, the same amount of nutrient added to the two soils, they may not supply the nutrients in the same amount to the same crop. Under a given situation of a soil, so the system of farming matters, the soil management, fertilizer and manure practices, they influence, all this will influence the productivity of the soils and also the crop yield. So, fertilizers essentially provide the additional NPK to the crops and their use in optimal quantities. This is essential for maintaining the soil fertility. Now, because of the limited availability of land, their use becomes more important not only for the increased yield but also to meet the food requirements of the growing population. Now, how do we define a fertilizer? A fertilizer can be defined as a mined or manufactured material containing one or more essential plant nutrients in a potentially available forms in commercially valuable amounts. The suitable material can be used such as rock phosphate or with some processing or products that are made from the raw materials in a factory. Fertilizers, again we can say that they enable the availability of nutrients to the soil and they also improve the physico-chemical properties of any soil. Fertilizer consumption. So all along we have been talking now about the fertilizer usage. Now in India, the farmers have practiced a cultural system that has ensured sustainable yield for centuries and maintained a desired level of fertility in the soil. Unfortunately, due to the increase in agricultural production through the introduction of high yielding varieties, intensive use of chemical fertilizer and pesticides and intensive tillage practices, this fragile equilibrium has got disturbed and this has resulted in the unsustainable growth. It is estimated that to feed 1.4 billion population of our country by the year 2025, India at least needs the minimum food grain production of 300 million tons, which would definitely necessitate the use of fertilizer. Now this is the graph, the source is from the Agricultural Statistics at a Glance 2016 from the Government of India, and here you can see the all India consumption of the fertilizer from the year 1950 to the year 2011. So on one side you can see the fertilizer consumption and on one side you can see the year, and from 1950 till 2011 you will see that the total amount is also given in one of the graph line, and in the other three you can see the increasing amounts of the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium salts, all this which has been used in the Indian agricultural sector. So it has been increasing substantially. Now chemical fertilizer. So this would remain the major and the very important component of the integrated nutrient supply system under the intensive cropping, because these will contribute almost 50% to the increased crop yield. The National Academy of Agriculture Sciences India, they have estimated that for meeting the food needs of India by the year 2025, India will have to increase its plant nutrient supply by over 45 million tons from the current level of the nutrient supply through the NPK fertilizer, and also through the organic manure we can supplement another 4 to 6 million tons. Let us now classify the chemical fertilizers. So based on their chemical composition, we can classify them as mineral fertilizers. These are inorganic and synthetically produced organic compounds. Then we have the organic fertilizers. These are basically the waste products from the animal husbandry that can include the stable manure, the slurry manure, plant decomposition products, compost, peat, the products from the waste treatment, that is composted garbage, sewage sludge and so on. Then we have the synthetic soil conditioners. These are products whose main function is to improve the physical properties of the soil, for example the friability and also the water and the air transport. Now based on the nutrient content also the fertilizers can be classified as straight fertilizers and compound fertilizers. Straight means that they contain only one primary nutrient, example urea or triple super phosphate. In the case of compound fertilizers, you have several primary nutrients and sometimes the micronutrients also. The multi-nutrient or compound fertilizers, they can contain two or more of the nutrients. In bulk blend or the blended fertilizers, there we are using two or more granular fertilizers of a similar size and they are mixed in order to form a compound fertilizer. Coming on to micronutrient fertilizers. These contain the nutrients required in small quantities by the plants as opposed to the macronutrients. Fertilizers can also be classified as solid or liquid fertilizers and as soil or foliar fertilizers, the latter being applied exclusively by spraying on an existing plant population. Fertilizer pollution. So now we have seen the fertilizer usage, the fertilizer consumption in our country, especially in India, and we have also seen the classification of the different types of fertilizers. Now let us see how these fertilizer is impacting the environmental health and causing a lot of environmental pollution. Though chemical fertilizers, they are increasing the crop production, their continuous application will lead to soil deterioration and also degradation. So the pollution from the fertilizer nutrient, this occurs when the chemical fertilizers are applied at a greater rate than they are fixed by the soil particles, or they are washed off from the soil surface before the plant uptake. Now the excess nitrogen and the phosphorus, these containing the fertilizers, they can pollute the surface water through the runoff or the groundwater through a process called as leaching. Again, fertilizers like urea, ammonium phosphate, ammonium chloride, they can all reduce the soil pH. The excess nitrogenous fertilizers, nitrogen containing fertilizers, they can lead to soil acidification and also soil salinization through the nitrification process and other nitrogen transformation processes. Acidification of soil. This will lead to the soil pollution through the mobilization of the heavy toxic metals, and the overuse of the fertilizer will also harden the soil texture. It will pollute the air and the water, and again this is also releasing potent greenhouse gases. So excess salt and water. This will lead to the salinization, that is impregnation of the soils by the salt. This could be due to the salts of gypsum, sodium sulfate, magnesium sulfate and sodium chloride. This can precipitate from the groundwater by evapotranspiration even during the dry spells. And excess irrigation, this will also shift the groundwater level, and this is also a significant cause of soil salination in the agricultural lands. Therefore, the excess use of the fertilizer, this has resulted in increased concentration of nitrates in the drinking water, in potable water, the nutrient enrichment through leaching, sediment erosion leading to eutrophication and deterioration of the surface water quality, contamination of the soils by the heavy metal through fertilizers such as cadmium and from the phosphate fertilizers. Nitrate pollution. So nitrogen, this occurs in many forms in the environment, and it also takes place in many of the biochemical reactions. We are all familiar with the nitrogen cycle. The four forms of nitrogen that are of particular significance in environmental technology, they are organic nitrogen, ammonia nitrogen, nitrite nitrogen and also the nitrate nitrogen. So the nitrogen in the nitrate form, this is a basic nutrient that is essential to the growth of plants. So the nitrate fertilizers are carried into the streams, in the rivers, through runoff and also further to the seas and the oceans. And they then contaminate the groundwater as they can seep into the soil. Excessive nitrate concentration in the surface water, they will encourage the rapid growth of the plants, which are microscopic plants also, called the algae, and the excessive growth of the algae, that is called as the algal bloom. You would have seen this in the lake ecosystem and in the pond ecosystems, which will degrade the water quality. So the growth and death and decomposition of the algae, that will cause the oxygen depletion, which prohibits the growth of fish or the marine life, resulting in some dead zones. Algal bloom, they are observed in the Baltic Sea, the Gulf of Mexico and other nutrient enriched aquatic environments. And nitrate in the groundwater, this can also lead to serious health hazards such as the methemoglobinemia and the formation of other nitrosamine compounds. And also the nitrate leaching from excessive and imbalanced use of the chemical fertilizer, that will also result in surface and the groundwater contamination. Now this is one figure which is showing the blue baby syndrome. This is occurring due to the nitrate pollution. When these are applied as chemical fertilizer, then the excess nitrates, this can also be a threat to the newborn infants and also children, because the nitrate converts to nitrite, which can react with the hemoglobin in our blood in the body, and that will reduce the blood's oxygen carrying capacity, and that leads to methemoglobinemia, which is not able to transport the oxygen to the various tissues and cells of our body properly. So the baby will appear as blue in color. This is a methemoglobinemia levels. When it is less than 3, then it is none, but when it is between 3 and 15, it gives a blue or a slate grey skin complexion to the baby. 15 to 30, cyanosis and chocolate brown blood, and when it is above 70, then it results in death. Eutrophication. The nutrient enrichment in the lake is a natural process, and human activity or anthropogenic activities accelerate this process. So this is characterized by a relatively shallow and warmer body of the water, especially in the lake ecosystem, with enough nutrients to support large population of plants and the animals. So here in this figure you can see how the eutrophic lake, there are algal blooms, and the dissolved oxygen also will be depleted in the waters, and there are thick deposits of organic silt and very high nutrient levels. Nitrous oxide emission and global warming. So this nitrous oxide, this concentration has increased from pre-industrial levels of 270 ppb to 319 ppb in the year 2005, and now it is even increased. So it has a global warming potential, and it is a highly potent greenhouse gas, as the atmospheric lifetime itself is 120 years. So this is due to the use of nitrogen containing fertilizers, forest clearing and combustion. The Food and Agriculture Organization, they have estimated that by the year 2030, the global nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer and manure application will increase by even 35 to 60%. So this is alarming levels. Then we have heavy metal pollution. So here you can see a farmer spraying the pesticides, they are spraying the fertilizers on the agricultural land. So these are found in the chemical fertilizers, and what are the heavy metals? They include cadmium, chromium, copper, cobalt, molybdenum, then the lead, nickel, arsenic, mercury also, selenium, vanadium, and also radionuclides like radium-266. So these are required for the plant micronutrient for the growth and development, but they accumulate in the soil due to repeated applications of these fertilizers, and then they will accumulate in the food chain through biomagnification, and then that becomes a serious health threat for all the human beings and also the animal and the plant fauna. Therefore, integrated nutrient management is very important. The continuous improvement of the soil productivity on a long-term basis through appropriate use of fertilizer and organic manure for the scientific management for the optimum growth, yield and quality of the crops in specific agroecological conditions. It helps to restore and sustain the soil fertility, it helps to restore the crop productivity, and it also checks the nutrient deficiency and the soil problems. Now let us end our session with just one or two case studies. So in Jharkhand, they have been using the chemical fertilizers. Here let me tell you, the farmers have a lack of knowledge about these, and there was a misuse of the chemical pesticides and the fertilizers. There was a 6-fold rise over the last 6 years. So monocrotophos, this was hazardous and it was banned in India since 2005, but it is still being applied on chili, capsicum and cucumber. It is also applied like the profenophos and cypermethrin. So they are using them on the cotton, on beans, on cauliflower, on cabbage and on paddy. So the farmers are unaware of the waiting period, that is the application of the pesticides and the fertilizer and also the harvest. There was a failure of the state government to regulate this sector. The policy to shift agroecological farming is required, and this will produce the food that is healthy and that will suit the people's culture and tradition. Now here you see that was the farmers who are practicing the self-made organic fertilizers which are made in Bundelkhand, in Uttar Pradesh and also in Madhya Pradesh. So they have overcome the problem of the chemical fertilizers by innovation. Cow urine, neem leaves, water, the gram flour, these are all being used. And the NGOs are giving training, and this has benefits for the organic farming. So their income has increased, the cost for the production has decreased, and the benefits are really good for the marginal and the small farmers. In the same way, in Nammara in Kerala, this is also, here again you have the Ilambadi farms, you also have the Nelliyambadi hills. So here also the rice cultivation, rice fish integrated farming, the coconut farming, all this is being done. And here there is zero pollutant, and the self-motivated farmers, here again they use the organic manures and the composted materials, and they have definitely motivated the farmers for green solutions and for green farming. So my dear learners of this program and this session, we have understood about the chemical fertilizers, their classification, and how the overuse and injudicious use of these fertilizers has impacted the agricultural health, the soil health, and also when these chemicals are getting accumulated in the food chain, they can also impact the human health in the process. I hope you have had a good understanding of the same.